Hi Melanie, hi Keir.
Hi.
Thank you both to be here with us today. Melanie, you are Director of Inclusion at the BFI, and Keir, you are Head of Environmental Sustainability. As the BFI has established environmental sustainability, equity, diversity and inclusion as its core principles for its 10-year plan Screen Culture 2033, your positions in the organisation are more relevant than ever today. Could you tell us more about your respective roles and work at the BFI? Melanie, maybe to start off with you, what does it mean to be Director of Inclusion at the BFI today?
That's a good question. So I am the Director of Inclusion. I sit under our CEO, Ben Roberts, because inclusion work sits across everything that we do. So as the BFI, we do a lot of diverse things that include the entire pipeline of films, so from collections and archive to curating films in the cinema, through to funding the making of films. We do stuff around skills and education, to distribution as well, so really kind of across the pipeline, and our work sits across all of that because diversity and inclusion underpins all of that work in some way, so trying to be the most accessible that we can, the most equitable, including the most amount of people as a public funder. So my role is to lead the team that helps the BFI to do that, and also advocates to industry about the best ways of doing that. So through looking at policy, but also working with communities to do the best work for them and bring them together and highlight and spotlight talent, through to embedding this work into the activity of the BFI. So through consultation, talking to different departments about how they can do this work depending on what it is that they do for the organisation. So a lot of that is around advocacy, it's around consultancy, partnering with people. We work under the disability tenet, which is nothing about us without us. So we work with communities to ask them what it is they need from us, and we try and deliver that through the activity of the organisation, and work with internationally as well to sort of advocate for the best way and learn from other people about the best way to do this work.
So Keir, what does it mean to be Head of Environmental Sustainability at the BFI today?
Environmental sustainability is a new area for the BFI. We've been working on it for a while, but it's newly embedded as a strategic principle, which is a step change for us as an organisation, and I think it really reflects the general mood of the screen industries at the moment, where it's becoming increasingly a challenge to be surmounted, and also can offer competitive advantages in terms of production and really the whole breadth of the screen industries. At the BFI we have four main areas that we work on in sustainability. One is how we support industry, so there are two ways we do that. One is we're a national lottery funder, and we have a BFI National Lottery Sustainable Screen Fund, which provides about £200,000 a year to organisations BAFTA Albert and Julie's Bicycle to support our National Lottery awardees and also wider industry to do their work more sustainably. And the other side of that is that we offer additional support through special projects, special initiatives that aren't National Lottery funded, where we use the BFI's brand as a convening power within an industry to bring people together to act on climate issues, to consider climate content more in their storytelling, and to examine where they can be most impactful in tackling the climate and ecological crisis. And then we also do a lot of industry advocacy work, more governmental focus, so we're an arm's length body of government, and we are the government's advisor on film and television in the UK, and we're adding sustainability as a part of that portfolio as well. So we're increasingly talking to government on behalf of industry about what that means. And then the final area is our own organisational change. We have a film and television archive, we have two cinema sites, we have an office in central London, and we have visitors coming. We're a public attraction and we have to operate sustainably, but also our buildings have to be more environmentally sustainable. So the challenge for how we do that, how we run big events like London Film Festival, BFI Flair, are areas that we're working on in the coming 10-year strategy.
Looking ahead, what are the main challenges that you've identified today, and the goals you've kind of set for yourself in both your departments, and maybe how do they intersect?
I think for environmental sustainability, most of the challenge is about behaviour change. It's not about the knowledge of what to do. That knowledge exists out there. We know what to do, but how it applies to your specific circumstances is a real challenge. And I think that's true for inclusion as well. It's about getting people to unlearn how they've been operating and learn new ways of working, really.
Yeah, I would agree. I think as well, from a diversity and inclusion perspective, it's also around employment. So thinking about a mainly freelance industry and how that impacts the ability to do things that increase access and diversity and inclusion in the sector. So that's a huge challenge for us in terms of the BFI not being a regulator, and therefore how you can advocate and make that mindset change happen through best practice as an organisation, and also through how we advocate for that work to be done and show good examples of that to the industry, and how we can sort of roll that out and have a bigger impact with that. But I think that that freelance nature and that's the way things have always been done are kind of the biggest barriers to us in an industry that works very fast and kind of moves very quickly, and doesn't have much in the way of structure to be able to change those things easily and quickly.
And we know that the work culture in the screen industries is deeply unhealthy in some ways. It's a real problem. It's a barrier to entry. It's a barrier to keeping people in the sector, so it's not inclusive and equitable. But a more inclusive and equitable screen industry's work culture, you know, if you like, the good work principle that the BFI is leading on at the moment in terms of employment practices, also means that we'll have a more environmentally sustainable screen industries. You know, people being able to live and work live near where they work and go home at night, not have to stay overnight, etc., etc. Those mean that we will have a localised economy, a skilled economy all around the UK, and you know, internationally as well. It also means there's less travel in terms of production, and we're able to tell more stories from around the UK, around the world, in a way that is really equitable, inclusive, also environmentally sustainable.
And I think the ways in which these two areas have grown up is really similar. So it feels to me that the environmental sustainability aspect of this, of our principles, is a slightly newer one in terms of having kind of people that do those jobs, but it's similar in the diversity and equity and inclusion space, in that you know, the realisation that is a big piece of work that runs across everything that we do, and needing people and expertise to be able to advocate for that and do that work being a necessity. So I think in terms of the way that both of those issues are seen by the industry, we're kind of aligned in that. A lot of that is advocacy and a lot of that is mindset shift, and that it sits across everything in a way that not a lot of other things do. So so in terms of that, we're quite aligned in the way that we talk about how we work, and even though there are specificities to those sort of things, we're kind of on the same path, I guess, in that way, to show how important these things are and how you need to embed them and upskill people to be able to do this for themselves.
In terms of climate content and telling new narratives, telling stories from people with lived experience of those stories, they're sort of part and parcel of the same thing. You know, they're two sides of the same coin in a way, because actually they're new narratives that we know we need to tell and that we want to tell, but it's a challenge to the way we've done things previously. And there are people in the sector who don't understand the importance and don't value those new narratives, but we know that those new narratives are really valuable. And so in a way, there are two tracks you can think about: telling stories in a more inclusive way, telling stories from people who haven't had their stories told, but also telling, you know, stories that thread climate content through. They're two areas, but also they interlink as well. We know that people from Black, Brown and global majority backgrounds know things about environmental sustainability, traditional knowledge that we've not been able to harness, that we've not told those stories before.
And are often the communities that are most affected by climate change. So if you think about the effect of climate change on indigenous populations, on people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, people. So the sustainability conversation is one that sits in sort of privilege and the ability to do things differently or have the money to do things differently without really taking into account what all of that has an effect on those communities that kind of are unable to potentially do anything about it, or those communities that sort of have those effects on them. So I think there's that connection as well in terms of those narratives and in terms of those stories that we're trying to tell kind of speaks to that bigger piece around inclusion as well.
Yeah, I think the privilege is about sustainability as an abstract concept rather than sustainability embedded in your everyday life. And it is a real privilege to think of it in an abstract way, and so generally my approach is sustainability by stealth, which is that often people don't even think they're talking or thinking or acting in a sustainable way. They're motivated by other reasons, be it financial, be it to do with their health or their well-being, be it out of necessity for other reasons. That sort of sustainability by stealth is what I think is most valuable, because fundamentally very few people are motivated specifically by environmental sustainability, by the climate and ecological crisis. People are motivated for other reasons, and the co-benefits that a sustainable and inclusive approach brings to the way that we make film and television, or any audiovisual content, but also the stories that we tell, is really self-evident in a way. The co-benefits sort of speak for themselves.
And about the role of the BFI when it comes to content, I saw that there are some diversity standards that were put up, which are contractual requirements for all BFI fundings. When was that put in place, and how does it function?
Yeah, so the standards were put in place in 2016. So they were primarily a funding requirement for our film fund, which is now our filmmaking fund. And we're really about trying to address what you need to think about when you're thinking about diversity and inclusion throughout the pipeline of a production. So standard A is around on-screen representation, standard B is kind of heads of creative control, and standard C was around retention and training opportunities, and then D was around audiences and distribution, so thinking about who those stories are getting to. They were refreshed last year, so we now have a standard E, which is also about access and accessibility, and we have some provisions in there around duty of care roles and some change in the language, and they were also expanded guidance on those for all of the different funds that we have, because they now go across all of our funds. So there is specific guidance around skills and education, around archives, games and television, as well as they've been taken up by awards like BAFTA. The AMPAS has a version for the Oscars now. Our British Independent Film Awards have them. Film 4 and BBC Film use them. So they really have quite an impact across the independent film sector in the UK. And they sit in our certification department, so separately from the funding decisions that get made in our department that administers our tax relief for the government as well. Although those conversations are becoming more joined, so I think they have a lot more conversation with the funding decision makers as well, because diversity doesn't sit separately from those funding decisions either. So they really sort of were built as a guideline. It was a way to utilise the stick that we have with funding to be able to pull people through our values and through our expectation of how to address diversity and inclusion, and ways, it was guidance really to think about, they are guidance to think about how to do that. So there's criteria within each of those that you can sort of piece together in order to meet the standards. But if you take them as is, you take the guidance as is, it really takes you through all of those decisions around casting, what's in the story, whether the storyline is stereotypical or not, who's on screen, who's making the thing, who are you pulling through and progressing, and who are you showing those things to, what new audiences are you bringing in. So they operate in that way to kind of set a template for how we would expect people to think about diversity and inclusion in their storytelling, but also through their projects and organisations more generally.
And so if a production doesn't really answer to these standards, they're not going to get funding from the BFI?
Yeah, they become a conversation. So I think what's really useful about them is I think it's really rare that we would just sort of be like, you haven't done this, so you don't qualify. What tends to happen is that the certification team will go back to organisations and ask questions around the way that things have been filled in. And also our teams, it allows our teams to have those conversations with people around the decisions that they're making and kind of how to meet our priorities around funding. So, but yes, in theory, if people didn't fill them in, didn't want to fill them in, or couldn't fill them in for whatever reason, then they would not get funding from us. But I think in the main they become a conversation. It's not necessarily punitive. It is about trying to get people to do things in the right way and think in the right way from as early in the pipeline as possible. So, and I think the awards taking them on has been really useful for that, because people know that they're going to have to achieve them at some point to get a nomination for their award. So we get a lot more kind of early engagement with them, for people to really sort of be using them to embed that into their work as early as possible. So that's been useful as well.
Yeah.
It's a lot of it is about positive decision making. I think really
Correct.
conscious decision making.
Yeah.
It's not, like you say, it's not punitive, but it's a mechanism for having a conversation to say, did you make that decision for a reason?
Right.
And what is the reason for that decision? And it's it's the same with sustainability, about your climate storytelling, about the way that you actually make productions. There isn't a right or wrong answer in most cases, but we want to know that you have made the decision deliberately and not accidentally or without thinking about it.
Yeah, and engaged with those ideas. They are a priority for us. When you are coming to us, if we are giving you money, then we need those projects and the films that you're coming to us with, or the organisations that are applying to us to meet our values and meet our strategic principles. So the Standards Act as a guide for that side of things, if you're asking the question or if you don't know how to start. And I think it's like when they started, they really, I think people sort of were doing more than they thought, actually. So when they started to look at that guide and fill them in, they were kind of like, oh, actually, I didn't realise I was doing this over here. And then now we're at the point where it's kind of like, okay, but what else? Like, what else could you be doing? How are we pushing this? How are we disrupting what was? And, how are you making those decisions? And who are you working with as well? It's really around what partners are you using? What other things are available to you to be able to do this in the right way? So they're really a kind of guide and a shift of mindset around that, but they are part of the funding decision. So yeah, if you don't engage with them at all, then we're not the place for you. So yeah.
And this really links back to a conversation we had quite a lot at the ECPF forum about how we need to put more time and energy and money into the development phase and have these kind of conversations just as human beings, talk with the people who are just maybe not aware of the impact of what they're doing, not realising it. So
the least authentic version of, if we're talking just in terms of narratives and storytelling, the least authentic version of an inclusive narrative or a climate storytelling is when it's retroactively fitted into an existing narrative or an existing story. If you think about it right at the start in the development phase, really early on, when you're still playing around with ideas and the whole thing isn't fully formed, that's when you get really authentic storytelling, I think.
Yeah, and it's the same even around in the background. If you think about who you're hiring, if you're doing that last minute, you're not going to get the best talent, the most diverse talent. You're going to be trying to tick boxes, and that isn't what we want to do. And similarly with environmental sustainability, if you're trying to sort of retroactively make something sustainable, that when you've already paid out money or made decisions, or you're in the midst of trying to shoot something, like that's not going to happen, or it is going to cost loads of money.
It will cost you more money.
Whereas if you're thinking about these things at an early point, you can plan. And I think we don't always feel like we have that luxury in this industry, but there is time and there are ways to do some of that legwork, and that's really what this guidance is for, is to get that in as early as possible so that you're not panicking and you're not making kind of knee-jerk decisions that maybe aren't the best or the way that we would want you to think about these things. So.
Big aspect of in these standards is on-screen representation. It's the standard A, as you said. So what does it encompass, and what was the industry and the professionals' reaction to it when you first announced it to them?
I wasn't here, but from what I understand, the reaction was fine. Like, I think there was a bit of a bit of interest in them, and maybe some skepticism around from all sides around whether they were sort of tick boxy. We still get criticism. They're definitely not perfect as a thing, but we're constantly trying to work on those and consult with the industry about what is useful to them. But I think it's like anything with a new thing, people are wary, or they're not sure how it's going to work, or they're worried about what that means, or that they're not going to be able to achieve it. And actually, I think what has happened is they've just become part and parcel of what you need to do, like any other bit of an application form or anything else that you have to do, that people just sort of get used to the thing that you have to do. And so I think things have moved on quite, I mean, it's been about 8 years now, so I think things have moved on as well quite considerably from that point, to the point where some aspects of the industry are probably superseding the standards, of kind of thinking, some people are thinking very differently to them, you know, and thinking more intersectionally and you know, in a way that they weren't set up. So I think, I think generally people are grateful for something to guide them through and navigate through this area. In terms of standard A, it's not just about how many people are on screen, although it does ask, and there are sort of targets within the standards that talk to that, but it's also about how you're casting, you know, where are you looking for talent, what's in the story, are all of your ethnically diverse people in the background, do they get to speak, you know, so the questions are around stereotyping and tropes, and is this a story that we've seen before? So it's really kind of asking you to question not just who is in front of the camera, but what story is being told about them, and how that's being told. And that kind of links as well with the off-screen stuff. So who is therefore then telling that story, and what kind of right or experience do you have to be able to tell that story? So yeah, there's been a lot of work on the kind of numbers of people on screen, and I think that has moved somewhat in the last few years, but we're still kind of getting stereotypical narratives that need to shift, and so the standards begin to ask you questions about that too.
And I was wondering for Keir, how about setting kind of similar required standards, but for in terms of the environment and climate, both in production and in the content? Could we see that happening in the future? Because I don't think it exists already.
In terms of climate content, no. In terms of production, there is a version of it already in the form of the BAFTA Albert Sustainable Certification. So all of our Film Fund-backed productions are required to aim for certification, and I know that all of the major TV broadcasters in the UK, if they commission things directly, then productions are required to aim for that. But that's all about production, you know, the process of production rather than the content. It's a new area for the sector, I would say, to be considering climate storytelling. BAFTA Albert are head and shoulders leading the way on that, and they have set it out as part of their new strategy, and we have been fully supportive of that with them as a partner. We do some of that work ourselves with our own production. So for example, The End We Start From was a film, a BFI backed film that was released in January this year, starring Jodie Comer, and I think Gina McKee was in it, and Benedict Cumberbatch was in there. It was also Benedict Cumberbatch's production company was involved, and fundamentally that was in a way a really, really clever piece of climate storytelling, because it made almost no reference to the climate whatsoever. It didn't talk about a climate emergency, it didn't talk about climate change, it didn't talk about environmental sustainability. It was set in the context of a major weather event, but apart from the weather event itself, it didn't really talk about anything to do with the theory. So, and I suppose that's where we were talking about sustainability by stealth, really, is it features in the background, it's ever present, and everyone knows what the context to the film was, but it wasn't front and centre as a theme, which meant that people were still able to engage with the rest of the narrative of the film without being put off and thinking, oh, I don't want to watch a film about sustainability, which is really, really interesting. There's a whole scale of sort of planet placement, as Albert referred to it, all the way from very, very basic, is there just a brief reference, is there a solar panel in the background of the shot, that sort of thing, all the way through to much more sophisticated and complicated climate storytelling. And it really depends on what's suitable for your narrative. There's no point trying to shoehorn in content artificially, because the viewers can see it, and then it comes out in the ratings effectively. The viewership can tell whether it's authentic storytelling or not. At the moment, we have no plans to introduce an equivalent to the diversity standards, but I don't think that's the most impactful way at the moment that we can support climate storytelling. At this stage, that's not to say that it wouldn't be suitable in future, but at the moment I think there are other initiatives underway that are more impactful than the stick approach.
Yeah,
I think.
And I also think, as with sustainability as a strategic priority, it is just having that there, having EDI there, having UK-wide there. It allows for our funding teams to have those conversations. So as Keir was saying, something like The End We Start From absolutely would have talked about sustainability in their application to us. So it would have been thought about alongside everything else that we hold as priorities as an organisation. So just having them there allows for that to come out in a way that doesn't necessarily need that stick approach, but there's plenty of guidance around that from our peers at BAFTA and stuff as well. But just allows for that to happen. And what we're talking about, as Keir was saying, is authentic storytelling. We are talking about not just ticking boxes and sort of saying, I've got a few of those in there, and there's a solar panel. You want it to feel integrated and part of the story that makes it more interesting, and part of a story that hasn't been told before. And that's really that's a priority for our film making and our film funding over, kind of as a core principle before you even get to what our kind of social impact principles are. But we know that those stories haven't been told up until now, so they're of huge interest to us, because then there aren't enough of them.
And so, from your observations, where do you think would be more efficient to help push the climate narratives a bit further?
So I think that at the moment we have invested £100,000 a year in BAFTA Albert to deliver their climate storytelling activity as part of our Sustainable Screen programme. They do a whole host of climate storytelling work that's beyond the remit of Sustainable Screen, but it's all part and parcel of the same thing. We are supporting our own teams, so the filmmaking fund team, to upskill them to be more aware of climate narratives that are possible, that are authentic, and to creatively challenge filmmakers who come to us and say they want to make a film. How are they going to embed it? A lot of it is about the people element of it. Is it present in our team's everyday minds, in their everyday conversations, to be able to come out in the production of the work, whether that's at the development stage or at the actual production of the film or TV activity. It has to be present every day in what people are thinking, and my main priority at the moment is making sure that it is present, it's embedded, and frankly it has to be straightforward, because if it's complicated, people will say I haven't got time to do it. So people have to have the time and the space to think about it, but in a way that is not hugely challenging. It's not a special project, it's just part of the the mental checklist of, I need to make sure that I've got an inclusive storyline, that I've got a storyline that features climate content where it's appropriate, and how do I turn that into a production. I think that's the most effective way at this stage, at this relatively early stage for the screen industries, to be talking about climate narratives. we've seen productions like Day After Tomorrow from way back when, over 10 years ago now, which was quite disaster movie orientated, and that was of its time. Those sorts of narratives, I think, are less frequent than they were. You take The End We Start From, it's broadly in the same area, but it's a completely different film in a completely different way, and although it has an element of disaster to it, it talks about climate themes in a much more accessible, present, realistic way. It was set in a mass flood event, and originally we were talking about it as a near future film, but in reality it wasn't a near future film, it was Europe that summer.
Yeah.
So I think people are more aware that things like big weather events are related to climate, and the challenges feel more present than something really futuristic and catastrophic.
I wanted to talk just a little bit about data, because to ensure that social and environmental issues are well comprehended and addressed, there's a need for data. And so the BFI has mostly produced a data analysis of ethnic representation in the UK feature films from 2015 to 2018, where the outcome of this study, I don't know if you remember everything about it, but were the outcome promising, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, no, I don't remember everything of it, but I can imagine it was, not great. And I think that project was a continuation of work that I started when I came to the BFI. So my first role here was to design and undertake a research project that included diversity data about on-screen representation of black actors. So that report that you're referring to is a kind of an extension of that. So I was specifically looking at black actors for a season that we were doing on black stardom, and that sort of expanded some of those characteristics. And so everything that I've done since I've been at the BFI is to think about accountability and data, which as an industry we're not great at, again, because of that freelance nature, because of that siloed nature of the way that we work. There is no central repository, there is no easy way to collect data about people and on-screen representation that is consistent across everything that we produce in this country. So the work that I did on that project was historical, and that report is historical desktop research, which isn't ideal because you end up with a lag. So the time that it takes to do that work, that's why you're getting stuff that's up to 2018 and not up to 2023 or even more sort of contemporary. So, but in saying that, it's all useful. So it's really useful to understand where we are as a baseline. I think for a while data was seen as the thing, so if you're doing data you don't have to actually do any work to make any of those statistics better, because you can say how it is and go, oh, that's really difficult. I think we're getting to the point where data just should be and is, and we're having to think about how to make that better and continue to do it and report on it and be open about it. So we report statistics on diversity for the people that we fund and the people that we employ at the BFI on our website, split across some of those diversity data characteristics and also our pay gaps. So I think there's just something about kind of showing where we are and being open and honest about that, and what that data helps us to do is show whether things that we're doing are working, if they're not working, what else we might be able to do, what we should stop doing. So I think it's just really useful to have that, to keep our finger on the pulse, but it's not the answer to the work that has to happen to move those numbers forward. So they are inevitably bad, those statistics. They increase way slower than anybody wants them to. But we have had some success stories around gender, for example. And I think without the data and without targets, you don't really ever get to a point where you can see that. So they've been really useful to kind of show us the baseline, show us what good looks like and which areas we're doing well in and not. But I think there's a lot of work to do to get to really sophisticated intersectional data that then kind of properly feeds into the work that we're doing at the same time. I think there's a bit of a disconnect of those two things at the moment. But yeah, really necessary, but it's also not, it's one bit of the toolkit to be able to move things forward. It's not everything.
And about environmental representation, did the BFI produce any study related to it? Or are you relying more on other institutions like Albert, who's doing its own work on this, and also through these data analysis showing that there's a big there's a lack of representation of climate on screen?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a lack of representation. We know anecdotally where there is representation, but what I think is important is not to reinvent the wheel. And that's part of the reason why we've focused our efforts on investing in BAFTA Albert's activities and getting them to enhance their work through the investment that we've given them, because we don't want to repeat what they're already doing. Recently, I think it was last November, Albert released a report on environmental impact of screen filmmaking, and it was a really enlightening study. They're doing a bit more work, so they've now got a head of climate content, and Catherine will be doing some exceptional work in the coming weeks and months, because it's really needed. There is a lack of evidence, and we've not been able to capture any evidence at the BFI in an empirical sense. All we've got at the moment is anecdotal evidence. So with BAFTA Albert's new strategy, I'm really hopeful that they will be able to put some numbers on that work. There's a bit of academic research going on in the broader screen industries, but tying that all together, making it really relevant for the BFI's purpose in independent filmmaking is lacking at the moment. It's an area that we need to work on.
Coming back to the idea of the intersectionality that exists between both of your jobs and areas of work, how does that translate in maybe kind of a day-to-day basis? Do you have projects in common between your areas?
We just sort of bother each other,
Yeah.
don't we? I think
We spend a lot of time together.
Yeah, I think it's really emerging. Keir's role is relatively new. The diversity and inclusion bit of the BFI has a bit of a longer trail in, so I feel like you're treading ground that I've tread a little bit over the years. So we do a lot of kind of trying to bring that together and think about what things make sense, again, sort of not reinventing the wheel, but
yeah, we've been able to hop, skip and jump over the stuff that you've already done, because we've learned from what you've been doing. But also, what's really interesting to me is making it present in the everyday and not making sustainability a special project. It'll never be finished. And it's the same as the work with inclusion. And at the moment, Mel's got a wonderful team, and I'm working on my own. So I'm trying to be as impactful as possible in the organisation and across the whole of industry by bringing people together and trying to embed it in their everyday work rather than special projects, which is why it doesn't really manifest in any special projects that you and I are working on together, because actually we're present in each other's conversations a lot, we advocate for each other in the spaces where the other isn't there, but I don't think we think that a joint special project would be the most effective use of our time.
Well, I think a lot of the strategy that we're working with, so the inclusion strategy that I've written and Keir's just writing, and one for environmental sustainability, but neither of them, I don't like to talk about initiatives really, because what I'm talking about, what I've learned about this work is that it needs to be embedded in other people's work. So what both of us will be trying to do is work ourselves out of jobs, essentially. And I think that so in terms of initiatives, there's not really much that I'm interested in kind of going, let's just do a thing over here. Like, it has to feel like it's moving something forward or it's having an impact. So there are amazing teams that we work with that do their work really well and they're experts in it. It's not for me to go, I'm just going to do a thing that's like what you do but with an inclusion or an environmental spin on it. So what we're doing is kind of consulting with those teams, and we work together, so we back each other on that and sort of talk about each other's work. It's more about the mindset, I think, and the development of the idea of all of these things being joint, and kind of social justice and social impact, and trying to make the organisation understand them as kind of interchangeable and kind of co-joined things. So I think it's more around that. At the moment we don't have any plans to do anything that is initiative based.
I think the fact that we're both sat here doing a joint interview is something that no one would have conceived of 12 months ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we presented on our respective areas to the whole BFI in November, December last year, something like that.
Yeah.
And having it presented as a joint thing, as under the banner of social impact, alongside our third strategic principle UK-wide, is quite revolutionary for us as an organisation, but also for industry, and to be able to represent publicly, outwardly towards industry, how we are joined in force trying to do this, and we recognise the co-benefits that come from each other's work.
Yeah, and the wider impact that has, and being able to speak to those things, it makes sense. And allows us to move things forward in a way that is more impactful for the sector, for the organisation.
Well, thank you very much for being with us and for having spent all of this time sharing your expertise with us. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Great.